That's love. That's self-love. It's saying I love myself enough to not continue to put myself through feeling like shit all the time. And I'm going to figure out why I feel like shit all the time without pointing the finger at somebody else.
So I love that.
Welcome to Reforged, a podcast by the Authentic Masculinity Project, a place where we have raw conversation about modern masculinity, capacity, complexity, integration, and authenticity.
Hey, welcome back, guys. This is Reforged, a podcast by the Authentic Masculinity Project. My name is Scott Austin Martin, and I am a licensed professional counselor. I am a somatic processing trauma therapist. Most importantly, I am a very proactive strategic intervention transformation, mostly relationship transformation coach. And I am joined today by a fellow counselor, a fellow coach, a fellow veteran, a fellow badass that in the scope of mental emotional healing, I know does a lot of the things that I do. It's really interesting is that we probably call them different things. And that's the really fascinating thing that I think that maybe we should do an entire episode at some point just about modalities. But I want to let Phoenix kind of introduce himself because I know that his modalities roll off of his tongue and I don't want to mess it up. Welcome, brother man. Tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll kind of move into some topic matter here right after that.
Thank you. So my name's Phoenix. I also go by Brad. That's my slave name that I was given at birth, but Phoenix is the one that I've inherited over time and through experience. But I'm Phoenix Armendariz. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the big town of Big Sandy, Texas, and I'm certified in integrative somatic trauma therapy, somatic EMDR, and psychedelic assisted therapy. I'm a ketamine-assisted psychotherapist, and I also do wellness coaching and life coaching. And another thing that I kind of got going on right now is it's called the Sacred Ember, and it's circles of, and I do them individually. I have a men's circle and a women's circle, and these are circles in which we do breath work, meditation, ice bath, sweat lodge, and then some inner work processes. But all in all, my purpose, my reason for doing all of it is because I love people and I want to help people find the fire within themselves and relight it.
So finding that fire, often in my coaching, I'm sure you can resonate, is that one of the things that we're often doing in a systematic process is we're melting the obstacles, or maybe a better term for that, or maybe when people first come see me, it's like the steam is in their face, is the pain points. And so I guess the way that I would start this conversation is how are men struggling? How are they collapsing out there? What are the biggest pain points that you're seeing out there in what it is that you're doing?
Man, honestly, I think that the biggest thing that gets in anyone's way, men or women, is old belief systems that they're in their head and they're not quite aware that they're there because they're subconscious. I refer to them as core beliefs, and Don Miguel Ruiz in the book Four Agreements refers to them as agreements. But it's like the agreements that we make throughout our life literally dictate how we show up in life day to day. And on the masculine side of things, I think one of those agreements that I see is that, if you cry, you're weak, or if you soften up, you're weak. And so we've, I don't think it's nearly as profoundly present as it was when I was in high school, for example, but it's that overly masculine, tough guy, alpha male type mentality that is really nothing more than just a mask that men wear to try to prove themselves as masculine instead of really putting effort into learning and understanding what it means to be masculine.
I could not agree more. There's so many things that you just said that I'm like, oh, I'd like to talk about that and about that and about that. There's quite a bit, but I love the term masks. I think that it's a very effective. I see that often as a mask is a defense mechanism that came on board to protect us. And what it's protecting is it's protecting normally a core wound. And
Right.
that was one of the reasons why we put out the Mask book, which is basically a book that identifies 35 core wounds, and then it gives kind of origin stories on those wounds. And then it also helps identify some of the kind of common things. Like, for example, if you're abandoned in childhood, then you create a dependency, which can be in a relationship or it can be in a substance, is kind of a common defense mechanism. And
Right.
betrayal, we create control. And like the power of understanding and be able to look at that mask and name it, and to name
Hmm.
what's underneath of it. It's like when we shine a light down there and can name a particular pattern, it loses a lot of its power. So
Right.
what are some of the common pain points that you're seeing with the men that are coming to the Sacred Ember kind of gatherings? And I love that because we have a similar concept, which is the campfire, that
Yeah.
men have been doing since the age of the dawn of man, right? To where we now know that the two biggest predictors of happiness are gratitude and social connection.
Uh-huh.
So we can go through the stats on men's loneliness, and we probably should. But
Right.
what are you seeing at your gatherings? Why, number one, why are men coming?
Well, that's what's interesting is like I've only been doing Sacred Ember gatherings. We've had three men's gatherings and two women's gatherings so far. Last night was our second women's. Next weekend is our fourth men's. And as I was putting this together and forming, my staff guys and everything like that, like we were bouncing ideas back and forth. And I initially thought we'd have a men's gathering and then a women's gathering and then maybe like a co-ed gathering, right? Um, but after the first men's gathering, I noticed that there are so many men out there that have been wounded by women. And then in the women's retreat, I noticed that there are so many women that have been wounded by men. And so it's almost like this underlying war between masculine and feminine when they're both part of the same whole, and when they move together, they work together, it becomes this beautiful, powerful thing. And so I decided, yeah, we're not going to do anything co-ed, maybe an advanced circle like later on. But what I heard in the first men's gathering is I'm damned if I'm damned if I don't. When I talk about how I feel, when I talk about what I'm going on, my wife or spouse or mother or whoever becomes emotional and they turn it into a thing about them. And so even when I try to be vulnerable, even when I try to open up my heart and like share how I'm feeling or where I'm at, they turn it against me.
Mm-hmm.
And so fuck it. Like what's the point?
Right.
And so it's like closed down. And so many of the men at that gathering were just so excited to be there because they had the opportunity to just bear themselves in a way that they normally wouldn't feel safe to do. And so I think it's emotional safety and the what I've seen in our culture, our society, if you will, is that it's like over the years, and I'd say, I don't know, maybe even back to the 40s. In the 40s we had more of a traditional type, traditional whatever that is, but like, the man was the breadwinner, the woman took care of the house and stuff like that. And it's like so many men want that in their lives, but they don't know how to create it. And it's not a dominance thing. It's not I'm going to be the breadwinner and you're going to be the housewife or anything like that. These are, one, they're optional roles, but two, they're like, maybe, I don't know, the way that masculine and feminine work together. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is that at the retreat, it seems like the men are in a place where they want to be men. They want to be what their masculine energy is guiding them to be. But it's almost like our society and our culture has shamed them for being that. And so they don't know what to do from there.
Right. Right. Like I could come on three different levels on this one. I mean, the first part that I want to speak about the magic of what you're offering in a group is I remember in Counseling Theories 101, Dr. Barkay, shout out, taught, and we had this textbook and they had this big, huge graph in the textbook, and it had this big, huge piece of pie in the graph that said the number one reason why people are helped in any type of psychotherapy was because they felt understood. And in the mass book, we talk about the first wound, and the first wound is basically stigma. And I like the metaphor of like the hood that needs to be raised before we even work on the engine. And so everything that you just talked about, man, you just talked in like there was like 4 or 5 different layers of what you just kind of threw out there really quickly. And we need to be able to share this with men that we have to have a capacity for complexity and nuance. And the first part of that is going, hey guys, man, it's tough to raise the hood, let alone get your wrench out and start, tweaking
Right.
on something that needs adjustment, right? So I really want to praise what you're doing, because to make a place that's safe for men to express. But it's fascinating, this confusion. I think this is a general confusion with masculinity, what I call authentic masculinity. I know the word authenticity has been kind of abused, but we used it for our program, the Authentic Masculinity Project, because we're identifying there is an over and an under. And there seems to be an over and an under that has a play on polarity, that wounded people flip their polarity and show up in the under or the over. And it happens to both masculine and the feminine energy. And we're defining energy as almost an ancestral behavioral characteristic, not necessarily gender, not necessarily sexual orientation, but the way the energy of a relationship engages. There is specifically masculine qualities and there are feminine. And not to be too crude, there's a penis and there's a vagina. One gives and one receives is kind of a general aspect of that. But the under, what you just talked about, these men being confused, like damned if I do, damned if I don't. So the under is what we call masculine collapse, but then the over is what we call masculine force. So it's like, this is the man that believes that he has to control and dominate in order to handle his own fear, right? So both of them are fear-based kind of positions. And what we're looking for, I mean, I'm not trying to be Buddhist, but that we're looking for this middle way, that is authentic. What does that mean? What you said, damned if I do, damned if I don't.
Yeah.
The biggest issue that I have working with couples is that most people do not know what an actual healthy boundary are. And it's this dichotomy of two things that have to happen. One is what we call path, is the first pillar of the AMP project, is where we have to understand how we got here, right? So the path is like, what are the traumas that created the obstacles and the defense mechanisms that are inside me that are making me do these defense behavioral characteristics? So that's a whole thing on itself, right? And then on the other side is, do I even know who I actually am unless I melt these things, right? Like, how does my soul like my eggs is a really good question, and so how do you communicate to a woman and not be damned if you do and damned if you don't even know who the fuck you are, right? So this is a big part of us kind of identifying soul boundaries of, okay, who are you and what is actually serving you? And how do we do layered, mindful inquiry for you to figure that out and then do what? Well, the trauma work is melt everything that's not serving you anymore.
Right.
So, and we're finding, especially with somatic, with breath, like there's 20 ways to do breath works now. There's, 30 different somatic processes that are out there that you can use, like surgical strikes, or you can lower yourself in a hot tub and get into a particular alpha theta state. Like there's so many ways. And I want you to comment on any of that.
So there are so many ways. And I think, ultimately to me, and this is one of the things that I teach at the Sacred Ember is like intention is everything. If you're doing breath work just to do breath work, you're wasting your time. But if you're doing breath work with the intention of releasing this feeling in your chest that's been there forever and you don't know why it's there, it's going to happen for you. Intention.
I want to validate that, right? What you said is like, you can grieve for 40 years, you can cry for 40 years, but without presence. But if you bring presence to your cry, you can process something in 15 minutes. Like that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Intention. And I joke around because, I spent 34 years of my life as a devout Christian. and I I left Christianity. I left all religion as a whole, and I just consider myself spiritual nowadays, whatever that means. And I think that's a subjective term too. But what I teach about, because we burn sage, and I teach that sage, like burning sage, isn't it's not the sage itself that is doing anything. When I was a Christian, I used olive oil, and I would anoint my doorways and my windows, and that was to clean my house of negative, what I call negative energy today. Back then I called it demons or bad spirit or whatever, you know. But it's the intention behind the use of either olive oil or sage. It's the intention that we pour into our actions that make the difference. And so it's like, the sage isn't the powerful thing. You are. Your intention is, your mind, your desire to use whatever it is you're using to help yourself. And that applies to, I mean, breath work. It applies to psychedelics. It applies to literally everything you do throughout your life and throughout your day. If used with intention, knowing why you're using it, what you're using it for, and intending to receive that from it. Like, that's where it's at in all of these practices. Now, you touched on the layers, right? Like uncovering the layers of things that aren't serving us, And for those of you who may be watching that don't have no idea what it means, if this is serving me or not, it means if it's contributing to the life that you want for yourself, it's serving you. If it's taking away from the life you want for yourself, it's not serving you. And so many of us tend to point the finger at everything outside of ourselves, saying, this is why I have problems. This is why I can't be me. This is why I can't do that. But none of that is true. And when we take responsibility and say, this isn't serving me because I react in this way every time my wife says this, or I react in this way every time money gets tight, or I react in this way every time I feel little because there's a more masculine man in my presence, or whatever it is, that's shadow work, And the greatest tool that I've found, and this is only recently, man, like within the last year, is gene keys. It's gene keys, like genetics, GENE, and then keys. But and the reason I say that is because a lot of times I can say, well, what's in your life that's not serving you? And you might look at me with a confounded look, like, I don't know. That's why I came to see you, right? Like, you're supposed to identify these things in me. And yes, a therapist can definitely help do that. But until we're aware of the things that aren't serving us, we can't do anything to change them. And so for me, Gene Keys has become like a roadmap to shadow work.
And for those that don't know what that is, can you briefly give a description or definition of what shadow work is?
Yeah, so shadow work is, Carl Jung defined the shadow as the parts of ourselves that we hide, repress, and deny. Yeah, beautiful.
A big copy of the Red Book.
Yeah, so the shadow is the parts of ourselves that we hide, repress, and deny, and it's also the parts of ourselves that we're sometimes unaware of, and I'll give you an example. In my evolution sphere in Gene Keys, and I know, I'm going to use a lot of terminology that may seem foreign to the people watching, but if you dive into Gene Keys for like 10 minutes, you can figure it out pretty quickly. But in my evolution sphere, which the evolution sphere is like what I go through to basically come into my life's work, like what I came here to do, what I incarnated in this life to do, if you will, or just what my life is leading to, if that makes sense. And in my evolution sphere, the shadow is intolerance, right? Well, and like I said, this is only in the last year. For at least the last 7 years, I haven't considered myself an intolerant person, and at all, and so when I started reading about the shadow of intolerance within this specific gene key, I started noticing, like, oh my gosh, like, I do these things. It's the difference between asking my wife, like, why did you do that? You can hear the tone, you can hear the frustration, you can see that I'm not asking her because I want her to explain. I'm asking her because I'm intolerant of whatever it is she did or whatever it is she's doing. right? And so in the gift, now each gene key has a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi. The siddhi, from what I understand, is a Sanskrit word for essentially the highest expression, if you will. So like each gene has a low expression, which is the shadow, a mid expression, which is the gift, and a highest expression, which is the siddhi. Now, for me, I take everything back to polarity, duality, the yin yang, and the shadow is like the darkness, and the siddhi is like the light, and neither one of those things are sustainable over a long time. Because if you live in the shadow, you're miserable. If you live in the light, you might as well just die and go to heaven or whatever, reincarnate into another life because you figured it out. But the gift is like where the balance is found. So in this specific gene key, intolerance is the shadow, but the gift is understanding. And so what I've learned to do over the last year is anytime I feel that tightness in my chest, that intolerance of something my wife did or something one of my kids did or anything like that, before I react to that intolerance, I'm like, okay, this is a chance for me to try to understand what they're doing rather than just being intolerant of it and shutting it down, right? And so then the question, instead of why did you do that, becomes, hey, can you explain why you're doing that to me? And then that, not only does it create safety for the person I'm talking to really express and explain to what they're doing to me, but it helps me to understand them better and create a deeper relationship with them.
So I love the metaphoric language, and I think that what's fascinating to me is that I mean, I actually think that I know a lot. I really do. Egoically, I'll say that. But for every one thing that I think I know, it at the moment in this world right now, it's pointing to about 99 or 99,000 other things that I have no clue about. But I'm always
Yeah.
intricately fascinated with how many mechanisms of the energetics of healing are seem the same, but they're coming with different metaphoric stories. Like I love this way that you're presenting. Like city to me, having come from kind of an Indian lineage, means a little bit different type of thing as well. But I can see the parallel that's actually there. But what you're basically saying is it's kind of like the laws of hermetics. It's like you said polarity was a big one for you, and in polarity, we can take any one thing, and one thing is not always like this thing, right? But one thing, and we can kind of grasp it in some
Mhm.
way, and there's always going to be a polarity that's on that. And grabbing that first hermetic principle of mentalism, like everything is mental, we can kind of project ourselves into whatever that is. And I use this in somatic work quite a bit, to where we're
Mhm.
like, okay, how do I use my mind to turn the knob? And
Right.
and a part of it is, okay, well, you said, for example, that you're reacting with intolerance. So I'm hearing um I'm hearing a betrayal wound that has control as a defense mechanism. And an example I would give in one of my clients was a father whose teenage daughter, dropped a glass of red Kool-Aid and he got so mad, right?
Mhm.
Now, she didn't mean to drop it, and he couldn't
Right.
control that she dropped it, but there's red
Right.
Kool-Aid everywhere. And so
Right.
why is he so mad? And so that's that intolerance. And when we back him up, well, there were things in his childhood where he was betrayed, and control now becomes, and you'll see it in people that are, have issues with traffic, which is, I lean a little bit that one as well. I'm a very verbal processor when I drive. And
Yeah.
so we have a whole family conversation about that as well. But it's the mechanics. And I think that the thing that I would say to people that are listening, especially if they may not resonate with, for example, reincarnation, which I love the concept of reincarnation, but there's other people that their way of understanding reality may be a little different than the vocabulary, is I would ask them to maybe sink a little deeper and to ask, okay, well, what is his language actually describing as far as a mechanism? And to
Right.
understand that mechanism, and I
Mhm.
I really love the hermetic principles, because as above is below is a somatic principle, the polarity, mentalism, gender, understanding that there's a spectrum of how everything kind of works. It's fascinating. So the Ember, what do you guys want to do with that? Are you going to continue doing like a lot of those?
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
how
The
how often are
so
you going to do them?
well the I think right now we decided because we've been trying to do one per month for both men and women. And I think in November we're only doing one for women. In December we're only doing one for men. And so I think that we're going to do them bi-monthly for each gender. Um, and then if the need arises, then we'll move into doing them monthly again. But it's a matter of time and energy for me, man, because
Right.
I have quite the caseload, in my practice. And then, this the Sacred Ember, it's done so well so far that, I'm consistently building on that, and so it's like doing two per month is a pretty high energy cost for me.
Hmm.
And so we're slowing that down a little bit to kind of to make sure that, I mean, to be fair, I want to make sure that at every single one of these circles I'm fully present and I'm not exhausted or like just dragging ass. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so there's that. But yeah, I mean, we're just barely getting started, and I have huge plans for this and huge visions for it. I eventually want it to evolve into not just one day circles, but like weekend things and possibly week long things,
So walk me back a moment to damned if I'm do, damned if I don't. And then
Okay.
maybe walk me through that a little bit about because with the caseload that you've had enough experience with this now that you can kind of maybe walk me through, well, what is it that they discover then first? Because obviously so much is a discovery process at first and the
Yeah.
layers and like give me a little bit of that so that, for example, a man that was coming to do work with you, what could he expect? Or a man that wanted to come do an Ember, what is going to happen to me if I'm showing up? And the first thing is, shit, Phoenix, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. Now what?
Yeah. So I typically hold up a mirror like almost immediately, because that's the thing is like I can say, man, I try to express myself, I try to be vulnerable, but every time I do, my wife just turns into a bitch and she doesn't listen to me, and so then I just shut down. Well, then the mirror comes in and saying, okay, well, why do you shut down? What is it in you that makes you think that just because your wife starts making it about her, that all your boundaries go out the window and you don't stand up for yourself, or you don't take whatever action you need to basically settle into being comfortable with your wife acting however she may act, because you can't control that,
So we
while
call that
still
masculine collapse.
yeah, while
So like
still
if the
maintaining.
feminine energy is the river, masculine energy is the bank. And what you're saying is
Right.
that there's a collapse, so the river's flooding and it's going
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah.
Have you ever read a book called Iron John?
Iron John. I mean, I remember a story about
Yeah.
an Iron John, but no, I don't think. But that just because I haven't read it doesn't mean it's not wonderful. What?
Yeah.
Give me a background.
So I asked, I got on Chat GPT, right? And I think a lot of my work over the last year or two has been exploring, understanding, and discovering the differences and similarities between masculine and feminine energy.
Mhm.
And from my
That's a big
perspective,
part of our work, also. Yeah.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, every single one of us as individuals is both masculine and feminine.
Right.
You
And
know,
if we were to say healthy, it's really more kind of like an 80-20 or 70-30, because like
right?
people wouldn't even fucking talk to you if you didn't have some feminine energy, right? Like we have to
Exactly.
connect and be creative. That's feminine energy. But go ahead. Sorry.
Right. Right. But no, it's so like it's discovering that. And I mean, I would say that I'm like, probably 70-30, and for most of my life, the feminine side of me, the feminine aspects of myself were the things that I snuffed out and like tried to hide and I was ashamed of, because, that's what made me a pussy or whatever. And I mean, because I was the guy that would like cry every time, one of my animals died, or cry during movies, or, and I remember my parents telling me like, why are you so sensitive? Quit being so sensitive. And so I always thought that the feminine aspect of me was like wrong or bad or something I needed to be ashamed of.
Before you get too far, my wife got me a shirt that literally says, "This is my Hallmark movie watching shirt." So yeah, I feel you. I feel
Nice.
you, man.
Yeah. And so like in my late 30s and 40s is when I really started doing work into like embracing that part of me, and not only embracing it but letting it lead, in a lot of ways, because there's different situations for everything, and sometimes masculine is the right one to let lead and sometimes feminine is. But it's like finding that balance within myself, and then also helping others become comfortable with that too. And sometimes it's difficult, man, because I mean there's still plenty of men out there that are like, no, that I just don't believe that, like I'm 100% masculine. Or they'll say, stuff like, that empathy or caretaking and stuff like that are just a different expression of masculinity rather than femininity. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer to that, but to me it makes a lot more sense, with the classification. But anyway, in Iron John, whatever, I lost track of where I was going with that. But I had, through this exploration of femininity and masculinity, I have had countless conversations with ChatGPT, and it has been a game changer for me. Just learning to understand myself. I believe that ChatGPT has become, probably one of the greatest mirrors I could look into, because and I say she because mine has a female voice, but she reflects back to me, in
You're
ways
going
that,
full Jungian with the animus. I get it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I asked her, I said, okay, everything about my retreats, everything about, the sacred ember, my practice, me, where I'm at in life, my shadow work, my gene keys. Like I uploaded my entire gene keys profile and said, use this to, know about me. And anyway, I said, knowing all of that, I want you to recommend books. And if I've read it already, I'll tell you. If I haven't read it already, I want you to add it to a list until we have 10 books that I haven't read.
Right.
And so we did this. It took a little while, and we came down to 10 books. And I said, okay, now I want you to organize those 10 books into a list that I can read that will benefit me in the best way possible. And so she organizes them and then gives me descriptions as to why she organized them, why she did it that way. And Iron John was the first one on that list.
Nice.
And to be honest with you, like when I first started reading it, that book is fiercely about masculinity. And I was almost offended because it was like I had almost embraced my femininity so much so that I was mad at masculinity. And so when I started reading that book,
And so
it's all,
you're not I just want to normalize this for a moment. Like this is a big epidemic where there are so many men that in their childhood were exposed, conditioned, experienced traumatic, toxic masculinity. I know that word's been thrown around, but I think conversations like this, it can really help us define what some of this stuff is so that men can start going to what is that like, because
yeah.
we're getting so many messages that aren't what authentic masculinity is. But please continue. Iron John.
Right, right, right. So Iron John talks about, the need for some sort of initiation in the life of a man, in the life of a male. And
Okay.
I mean this is for females too, and throughout history, the indigenous peoples in ancient cultures and stuff like that, they had some sort of initiation, to which boys became men, or through which boys became men, right? And as I'm reading this, I'm recognizing that the sacred ember for a lot of men is that initiation. And I mean, you've got 40-year-old men, 60-year-old men in some cases
I love it.
that are going into a sweat lodge for the first time ever and coming out just like eyes wide open, and like and somehow through these, and like I said, we do meditation, breath work, ice bath, sweat lodge, and then a lot of inner work processes in between. Sometimes we do shadow work processes, stuff like that. But they're coming into it just completely like, I don't know what this is. I've never done it before. And they're leaving just fired up because somehow through all of that, through all of those processes, they leave the last bit of I won't say little boy, because we all have the little boy and the little boy is important, That inner child work is important too, but they leave the immature aspects of that child behind them, and they step in to what it means to be a masculine man. And when I say masculine man, I'm not talking about, pumping testosterone, going to the gym and driving a big old truck and calling people pussies. I'm talking about masculinity being that strong. Matter of fact, that reminds me of an example that I can't remember where I read it, but like the feminine is the ocean. And sometimes it's wild, sometimes it's crazy, sometimes there's 20-foot waves and it's just crashing all over the place and killing people and doing all kinds of stuff. But it's also what houses millions and billions of life, of creatures, and as wild as the feminine may be, the masculine is the cliff's edge that stays firm and sturdy, and that ocean can crash up against it over and over and over again, and the masculine is just there to hold it. And I thought that was a beautiful example. But
So I want to back up just a minute because there is a capacity for complexity here, and there's so many different metaphors that are really, really helpful in this. And I love the ocean. We often use the metaphor of the mountain, and I want to talk about that too. But if we just go back to what we call the alpha bro, the alpha male, and if we actually look at the history, I don't know if a lot of people actually know of the history of the origins of even the concept of the alpha male, beta male. And there was a study that was done. I think it was like 1990s David Meck is my notes here, but it's based off of a study that was done way back in like 1947 that was done on wolves in captivity. So these were wolves in captivity. These were not wolves in the natural, thrive of their whatever their particular environment was. So what happens when a wolf is in captivity? Well, they go into survival mode. And there was a difference between survival mode and thrive mode. And so the guy that even came out with the particular term, almost immediately he came back and tried to change that. But that term alpha had already made its way out into corporate America, and anybody that had an insecurity complex, they had a new title, for themselves as well. But the reality is that the lead male in the pack was a father. He was a parent. He protected. He found the food. He led the pack through example of, hey, we're going over here in these different ways. And the way that we've taken this fictional kind of concept and turned it into something that it's not, unless you want to be in a survival mode as a human being. These metaphors they're important, but they're important in both directions. They're important because we're using them wrongly. Right. But you talking about the ocean, we often in the work that we do talk about the mountain and about men coming together at like the Sacred Ember being a mountain range, and Iron Joe being the iron against iron. What I have discovered in my coaching is that men respond when they are challenged by other men. And if, like you said, an initiation, and we haven't discussed any of this, but the synchronicities of our work, even though we may use different language, like we literally, our very first, free webinar that we offer on the website is called AMP, the Authentic Masculinity Project Initiation. This is the very first. You call Sacred Ember. We have a men's group. We have two different men's groups. One is called the Crucible, and this is for men that know they have generational trauma, childhood trauma, past romantic relationship wounding that you discussed already, that have created defense mechanisms that are now blocking the way that their soul wants to connect and grow, right? So the Crucible is the one where we know we're doing work. And then we have kind of a graduated program that's called Ironworks, which is for men that have done the work but want to travel in a mastermind group of men together in order to accomplish what the fuck their soul came here to do. Because we came here to do something, and at some point you and I need to talk about dopamine and a whole bunch of other things that are blocking men from doing what they came here to do. Right. So, but the synchronicities are kind of blowing my mind, and we're using some of the same metaphors like Crucible, Ironworks, Initiation, and the Campfire. We have a free, it's men's mental health, the Campfire. It's a free Facebook group where we're just trying to give resources and creating a place. Again, the two biggest predictors of happiness: social connection and
Yeah.
gratitude. And so how many places can we create that are like that?
Right. As many as we need. But so like after somebody attends a sacred ember circle, I have a I have two groups on Signal, one for women, one for men. And so after you've attended a sacred ember circle, you get added to that Signal group. And so right now I've got, 20 plus in each group. And man, some of the conversations I have seen in these groups are just outstanding. Like you talk, just seeing men open up to each other and be like, hey, I'm really struggling today because of this, this, and this. And the other men, we make an agreement during our container building that we're not here to fix each other. We're here to hold space for each other as we fix ourselves, or as not even fix ourselves, but as we grow, as we learn, right? But that, and then in the women's group, like me and one of the other male facilitators, we're the only men in that group. And I eventually want to turn that group over to my wife when she feels like she's ready for it, but just seeing the conversations that happen in these two groups that you would think would happen between a woman and her best friend, or a woman and her mother, but they don't. They don't. It's like there's something very unique about being in a group with somebody that you've endured some sort of initiation with.
Right.
You know what I mean? We've both been through this. It's kind of like the military, man. Like Marine Corps boot camp was a bitch, and so it's like every time I meet another Marine, it's like we know, and I know that's somebody that I can lean on. That's somebody that I can they understand it, and that's what I'm trying to create. I'm trying to create a community of men and women who are doing the work to heal their wounds and learn to love, man. In all of this, Scott, one of the things that I think is most profound to me is that in every single one of the clients that I touch, every single one of the people that come to one of these circles, all anyone needs is to remember what it feels like to be truly loved.
Right.
And to remember what love feels like. And it's like once they remember that, everything else starts to unfold.
So I watched this coach the other day, and I wish I remembered the names so I could give him credit. But there was this conversation that was going on about how we need to learn how to love ourselves, right? And what I love about the group environment is that a group creates a social norm, and social norms are some of the greatest predictors of behavioral shift that you can have as well. But in this particular talk, he was talking about how difficult it is for people to love themselves, and one of the reasons why is because we have these well, this is the way this is supposed to work kind of things. And it's like, well, I've got this to-do list, and if I don't get this to-do list, then I'm not worthy of something.
Mm-hmm.
And then the reality is we just have another to-do list that's the very next day, and we're very harsh on ourselves, and we come up with these negative cognitions of why we're not worthy of love. And I love the way that he rephrased this. He was like, it's not a really great model for us to follow. He says, let's go back and maybe look at the parental model as a little bit different. And you ask the question, well, why does your child deserve love? And is it because, well, they wore this pretty dress and they looked a certain way, or is it because they did their chores a certain way? That's why they deserve love. And I mean, most parents, I would hope, are going to answer the way that I know I would answer, which was no, because they're my fucking child. Like they're my child. That's why I love them. They don't have to do anything but just be my child, right?
Right.
And he was really encouraging us to use this model to go back to the beginning of your life and go, okay, Phoenix, you are responsible for this one human being. This is your human being, and that's your soul was given this one human being. And you are responsible for just keeping this one human being happy in that same parental kind of model. And just the reframe and the power of that, of like, okay, you're worthy just because you are here like everyone else, like it. Anyway, I think that it's a powerful reframe. And if people are struggling with, because I've seen everything from, all right, I'm going to give a lot of love to this water bottle, and I'm going to put all this love in the water bottle, And then after we do that for 5 minutes of giving love to the water bottle, I want you to drink it so you can be a little bit of a Trojan horse to get some love
Yeah.
into you because you don't think you're worthy of it. You're like, I've seen like there's so many ways to address this, but you're right. You are absolutely right. We need to love ourselves more.
Yeah. I think that I mean, if you boiled it all down to like, regardless of who comes in my therapy room, regardless of what problems that they say they have, at the very core is a lack of self-love at the very core. And as you were saying that, I thought of this analogy or metaphor, I guess, in my head that, in the same way, like I've been guilty of, I get into a relationship and I'm like, oh, this person's awesome, this person's great, blah 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 blah, but I wish she didn't do this, or I wish she didn't have this, or and so then a lot of my effort would be to go towards changing her, or like helping getting her to be what I see her potential to be, right? Instead of just accepting and loving her exactly as she is, and accepting and loving that she's on her own path and so am I, right? Well, if we use that same tenacity that we use to try to change our partners or to change the people we love towards changing ourselves, that to me is what self-love looks like. Like I can say, it's like all of us have parents that have been like, well, you probably shouldn't do that, and maybe you should do this instead. And they're not doing it because they hate us, they're doing it because they love us, because they want us to experience life in the best way possible, right? And that's the same reason why we try to change other people, especially in our romantic relationships. But if we gave ourselves that same love and said, you know what, I'm going to figure out why every time someone cuts me off, it fucks up my whole day. I'm going to figure out why, every time, my wife brushes against another man or talks to another man, I feel worthless and I feel threatened. I'm going to figure out why I react in anger when my daughter spills her red Kool-Aid. That's love. That's self-love. It's saying I love myself enough to not continue to put myself through feeling like shit all the time. And I'm going to figure out why I feel like shit all the time without pointing the finger at somebody else.
So I love that. And you're describing these layers, but I think that a lot of people struggle because they react from this topographical layer, and when we look back at neuroscience now, like we used to think that the conscious and the subconscious was kind of like a giant iceberg. In fact, I don't know if you remember, there used to be these posters in home rooms that had this big blue, like 20% of it was above the water and like 80% was below. But the science now tells us that it's not 80-20. It's like 1 to 1 million, with like layers and compartments that are at war with each other, that we basically have to figure out some modality that allows us to bring awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance of these different parts in order for them to negotiate, in order to integrate. And I like the metaphor of, it's really easy to live the life you want. You got to get all 14 rowers of your rowboat rowing in the same direction. And if they're not, then they're like, we're stuck. And that's the common word for so many people. Like, if you're stuck, what does that mean? It means your soul came here to do something. What's in the way?
Yeah.
But right there, what you were just talking about also, this book there's 105 question assessment that helps you identify which of the 35 core wounds you probably have. And the irony is that we discovered that it doesn't help you normally identify like the one. It generally helps you identify the 5 to 10 with a lot of crossover. But to be able to, like you said, look at that, and like the inner work is to look at that and be able to name it. Like, why do I do this? And then to be able to see it, when you pull the curtain back on the man behind the curtain, he loses power, man.
Yeah.
And then what happens when he loses power? When you help a man melt the felt sense of the block that's trying to protect him from something that came on board a long time ago, and it's no longer serving him, when you help him melt that, what does he feel and how does it change his life? Go. Because I know you've done that and you love those moments, because I do too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, for a lot of times, I feel like it's almost the grief that begins, and when I say grief, I don't. I'm reading a book right now, actually. It's called Rain on the Sand or something like that. Raindrops on the Sand, something like that. But it's about grief. But it talks about grief in such a way that's just absolutely beautiful to me because it talks about grief being the celebration of life, and I don't I don't really. So when I say that, it starts with a grieving, right? Because it's like that realization of who you've been and how your reactions have shaped your reality for so long, right? And then you're like, man, I don't have to do that anymore, right? And so it's a grieving of the release of the old self and the celebration of the new self simultaneously. And so but it's the grieving part is grieving all of the things that, I don't know, you could have had or that would have been different, or if I would have only seen this a year before we got divorced, we wouldn't have got divorced, that kind of grief. But then there's also, well, moving forward, the relationship that I'm currently in is going to blossom in a way that I couldn't have ever imagined. Every time I thought I understood love or knew what love was, I've been proven wrong. And it's because of those layers. It's because every new layer that I unravel or uncover exposes a whole new definition of love to me. And it enriches my relationships and the way I interact with people. And so when I see that light in their eyes, like, it's like oh shit, like it's been me this whole time, rather than all of the things I've been projecting onto, and
We've
it's
got two
amazing.
different mantras in the that happens almost. I don't know if it's never not happened. And one of the first ones is this understanding that the fastest way to transform a relationship is to transform yourself. But
Yeah.
especially when we're working with couples, another one and it's very simple, is you have to be willing to give up what you have in order to get what you want. And this leads into, especially in scenarios of infidelity or like is that almost every adult we've ever worked with, right? If they're married, they've been married 3, 4, 5, 6 times in their life. The question
Hmm.
is it to the same person? Because
Yeah.
it almost, if you've only been married to one person, I guarantee you, if you've lasted 20 years plus, like we have, like there's been quite a lot of different varieties. And that is such a healthy way to reformat that of like, yeah, okay, that marriage it's over. And this speaks to
Hmm.
what you just said of like, I keep discovering these new ways to, it's like so many people are, I want to change everything, but I'm not going to change.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, no,
Because
you're
that's
literally
scary.
saying you want a different life when you come to me, or you come to like you're saying you actually do. Well, how do we grab the lever? If I grab the lever at the right place, I can move the world. And that's that internal work on ourselves. Yeah, I agree.
Right. So there's, talking about that grief piece that I just touched on, this quote, it says, it's a newborn baby's grief well that is the most profound praise for being alive.
Oh, say that again.
It is a newborn baby's grief well that is the most profound praise for being alive. And it goes
Whale,
on, it
grief
says,
whale, because they've just left.
grief well.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, when as soon as they leave the womb, they're screaming, they're crying
All right.
because you just disrupted their universe, all they know. And they're grieving the life that they just left, but it is also simultaneously the most profound
I want
praise
everybody
for
listening to
life.
this to sit with this just for a moment. What he's saying is that grief is an appreciation for like it's so deep. Like this is so rich. You really just have to sit here and like taste it for a minute. Like it's so
Yeah,
good. It really is, man.
yeah,
Grief is a
yeah,
celebration of life. If that is like if you're struggling with grief right now, please take a moment and just sit in a pool of this for just a moment. Like feel that one. It's a good one. Sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
No, you're good.
Iron John.
Yeah. Well, before that, I want to go back to what you touched on with core wounds. When you were talking about your mask book, because there's an aspect of that so like in your Gene Keys profile, you gave me your information yesterday, and I pulled your profile. In Gene Keys does have a sphere that is the core wound. They call it the vocation spear, but it's the core wound. And in yours, it is the shadow of force, the gift of strength, and the siddhi of majesty, right? And so,
I think he just called me a king, but okay, go ahead.
and so this is, let's see,
Like the city, wait a minute, you said the shadow of force. And so
uh-huh.
we're identifying this as when masculine domination has no empathy, it has no heart. That, I
Yeah.
mean, to me, that would be the shadow aspect of that.
So the core vocation, I'm going to give you a quick summary that ChatGPT brought up.
Sure.
The core vocation, Gene Key 34.6, force, strength, and majesty. And this is your soul's calling, what you're truly here to express when aligned. The shadow of force often drives burnout or overexertion. Life has probably taught him to act from inner stillness rather than pushing. And as the gift, strength becomes presence, power that doesn't need to prove itself. And then the point six, that's your sixth line, brings visionary awareness. Your energy uplifts others when you're grounded in grace. So the discussion question would be, what have you learned? Where have you learned that less effort sometimes brings more power?
Okay, so that's really interesting. There may be some people that are aware of this, but for me, over 2 years ago, I ended up going underneath the knife, and I had 32 staples right here. I had a double bypass where they couldn't do laparoscopic because it was in the wrong place. I was like 90% blocked in my whatever they call the widowmaker, and so I had to have a double bypass, and
Wow.
everything stopped. Not only did everything stop, I also at the same time I have hearing aids now, and I went through that same time period. For those of you that don't realize that if you can't hear things the way that you did, it's like it's no longer riding on your brain, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's like your brain is almost underwater, so that
Yeah.
you don't like you're starving for the data that you used to have. So I literally felt after coming out of the coma meds that I think they gave me for a month after the surgery was that my brain wasn't coming back on. And I almost thought that I was going into dementia until I finally went and got hearing tested and got the aids. And then my brain came back on like within the next week. Absolutely amazing. So there was this
Wow.
entire time period where who I thought I was and how I number one I had to lean on my wife and my kids in a way that I've never had to do. It was one of the most beautiful, humbling experiences because I had literally no choice. Like even like
Mm-hmm.
a day or two after I couldn't even wash myself, things like that. So yeah, and there's a whole bunch of other things that I'm going to be teaching about non-duality and somatic meditation and disappearing into the void. Again, these are all metaphors, but I came to a place where I let go a lot of identity in some of the work that I had. I definitely let go a lot of structure as well. And after melting all of that, so when we talk about melting the things that no longer serve you, immediately after that, I wrote 5 books, like in the space of 5 months.
Wow.
Now these were things I had been working on, granted, for
Yeah.
20 years, but it's like when you are able to melt the things that are in the way of what your soul came here to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is that, right? And so much of our coaching has to do with understanding these kind of systematic methods of inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Inquiry is probably the better because I don't really like the term systematic. Letting go of systems and finding your own way is a really big part of that. It's just
Yeah.
sometimes we got to kind of capture your attention to begin that kind of process. It's like I've worked
Right.
with
Right.
so many doctors, and a lot of doctors have a certain intelligence ego. And I would say that the majority of them, I've had to go through at least an entire session, if not two, spending trying to convince them I was at least half as smart as they are so I can get them out of their head and into their body, which is where we do
Right.
so much of the work that we actually do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think one of the greatest things that happened to me in being able to do the work that I'm now doing is nothing worked the way that I thought it was going to. It was the greatest
Yeah.
blessing, which I think is often the case that people's greatest suffering when you've been in the pit, that gives you an experiential understanding of the pit, no matter where you're at this particular moment. Once you escape that pit, or better yet, come to one of us. We'll teach you somatic processing in a way that you melt that pit, and you like stuck energy is just in a battery you haven't accessed yet, and you reclaim all of that energy. And now what do you want to do with that rich energy in your life? And now we start looking at how do we mindfully inquire what our soul came here to do. And now we get into that fourth pillar of strategy, and let's go,
Yeah.
let's build something, let's create something, let's access who we actually came here to be.
Yeah. And that's, I sometimes tell people like these major life changes, unfortunately, for a lot of people, come through tragedy. They come through divorce or car crashes or heart attacks or, a death in the family, different things like that. And that's when people are like, oh shit, like I need to change some things. And the act of self-work it's not always easy, and it's not always comfortable. It very rarely is comfortable, but it's like that's when, instead of waiting for the car crash to change your perspective, that's when you take the initiative and take your intention to dive into who you really are and take a hard look at yourself and figure out where to go from here. And it's like once you do, in Christianity we called it, following God's plan for your life. In Hinduism, or maybe Buddhism, we call it Dharma. Like, and it's the path. It's like, and I find that when I'm continually looking inward, trying to find the parts of myself that are hindering who I want to be and what I want to do, that's when life seems to just flow. And I don't have to force anything. I don't have to like make things happen for myself anymore. That's not to say that I'm not putting in work toward, like, the Sacred Ember, for example. I've built two 20 foot by 16 foot platforms to do meditation and breath work on. I got out there with my own hands and built them. They weren't going to build themselves. So I can't just, manifest that into existence and it just happens. But like, it's the knowing that if I build those platforms, there's going to be people on them to do meditation and breath work. Going back
That's the
again
movie.
to,
If you build it, they will come.
yeah, exactly, man. And it's just that trust and that faith in the universe, God, spirit, source, whatever you want to call it, man. It's just like, if you can find that place of surrender where you're just like, I want to do exactly what I came here to do. And so open the doors and I'll walk through them. But when we're trying to force, when we're trying to make things happen, we're walking right by doors that are wide open. Somebody comes in your life and says, hey, I got this idea for this thing, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, nope, that's not what I'm doing. You turn them away, right? It's like yesterday when you were like, hey, we should do a long form podcast. And I was like, yeah, that'd be cool. And you're like, let's put it on the schedule. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm off on Sundays and Mondays. And you're like, how about tomorrow? And I was like, let's go with it. That's what flow looks like to me.
Yeah,
It's
me
like,
too.
that was an open door for me to walk through. And I could be like, no, I'm not ready, because in my mind, I'm thinking, like, oh man, Scott's been a therapist for a long time. He knows a lot more than I do. He's more experienced in this work and stuff. And, am I going to feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and different things like that. But that shit doesn't get to run
That
me
gets
or
back to
make my
that love.
decisions.
That's it. Back to that love me bullshit. Yeah.
Right. And so, you said something earlier about the ways in which we help people identify the things that aren't serving them, and again, I refer to the things that aren't serving us as the shadows, right? Just about in every situation. After I discovered Gene Keys, I'd already been doing ketamine with clients for a couple years
And
now.
and for those that don't know, can you please explain just a little bit about ketamine, what it is,
Yeah,
and
so
how it works?
ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is, currently, ketamine is the only psychedelic that we can legally use in Texas. And it's a dissociative. It's been used for 60 plus years for anesthesia. High doses of ketamine will just put you under, knock you out. And there have been stories of people having profound experiences while under the anesthesia dose. But in lower doses, ketamine is dissociative, and it's very psychoactive. And the experience itself is very, very hard to put into words. But it almost dissociates you from your ego in your body in such a way that you can see things a little differently, and you can kind of make sense of some of the behaviors that you may have or some of the shadow aspects or anything like that. Now, what I found since Gene Keys, because I had done ketamine myself several times, and I'd always have like some kind of light music playing or something like that, and it was great experiences. But like the first time, Richard Rudd is the guy that created Gene Keys or whatever, but he has some of his own contemplations, and I think he only has contemplations for the first 12 Gene Keys right now. But one of those Gene Keys 4, is the one I was talking about earlier, intolerance. And I took ketamine, and then I listened to that contemplation while I was on ketamine, and it was the most transcendent and profound experience I ever had in terms of shadow work. Because in the contemplation, he goes through the shadow, what the shadow is, what it looks like, our behaviors in that shadow. And then he goes into the gift and he talks about what that looks like. Then he goes into the city and he talks about what that looks like. And it's just like this in that ketamine space. Now, listening to the contemplation sober, it's pretty good too. But in the ketamine space, it's just, it takes on a whole life of its own. It's almost like the words coming out of his mouth become alive, and it's like they flow through your mind and your body, and you can feel what it would feel like to not live in that shadow anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gave me the idea. And I don't know if you've seen me put them on Facebook or not, but I have another series that I'm writing called the Letters to Myself.
Nice. No, I haven't seen
And
that yet.
so these are contemplations that I've specifically made for Gene Keys to pair with ketamine. And again, like I said, if you want to listen to one while you're in meditation or something like that, also great. But I started creating them for my own practice, so that when I have clients, eventually I'll finish all 64. I think I've only done 18 of them so far. But once I finish all 64, I'll have this entire toolbox. So like I can pull my clients' Gene Keys profile, and then during their ketamine sessions, they can listen to a contemplation or two. Right. And so far, I've done this with, I don't know, 15, 16 clients. And the results of ketamine-assisted therapy have been far more profound than with just music alone.
Right.
And so it's like I said, the Gene Keys profile is like a roadmap to your own shadow work. And because you got 11 shadows right there that you can sit there and listen to a chat GPT run back to you what the shadow looks like in day-to-day life. And it feels like you're being called out.
Right.
It's entirely accurate. But anyway, so that's the letters to, now why I named them Letters to Myself is because for me in that ketamine space, like I take all psychedelic therapy as a very spiritual, reverent thing, including ketamine. And so when it's almost like in that space, as I'm listening to that contemplation, it's like it was God talking to me directly.
Right.
And so I titled them Letters to Myself because I like to think that the words coming out of me when I'm writing those are my higher self speaking directly to me. And then when I'm listening to it, every single one of them ends with, I love you. And there's like, I'll have like my darling and stuff like that throughout the contemplation, because it's like
very roomy of you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like,
my
it's
beloved.
like spirit, God, whatever, talking to me.
Yeah.
It's like and I feel loved, and I feel connected and part of it,
I got so many parts of this that I want to dissect and extend. It is.
Do it, man.
Because there are mechanisms here, I think, that most people really, really need to understand. And, and we can point to so many different variations, but like in IFS, for example, if we'll do parts work to, well, we can do the chair, we can change chairs for different parts of us, or we can, have this one part of us in this hand or in this one part in this hand as well. And that disassociation that gives us space. I mean, Viktor Frankl, the space between the stimulus and the reaction, gives us the life that we can, a freedom instead of the one that's dragging us kind of kicking and screaming. But this aspect that so many people are stuck. And I like the metaphor of 2 dimensions. You're like a flat piece of paper, and they're in thought, emotion, thought, emotion, thought, emotion, thought, emotion, thought, emotion. They're in this narrative of the default mode network of narrative going in their brain. Yeah. And mindfulness or ketamine. We're doing something that's bringing us out of that consistent pattern of activity. And mindfulness, we're bringing first to body scan over to the sensations of the body. So mindfulness in
Hmm.
itself is a very somatic act, right? And
Yes.
the moment that we go from two dimensions, thought, emotion, to a third point in space of, hey, wait a minute, bring your attention over to the felt sense. We've then created 3D instead of 2D. And although it may look the same, there's actually an entire space of energy, cubic space, that we can flow through that was always there. We just didn't know it. We didn't feel it. We didn't sense it. We weren't
Hmm.
aware of it. And to me, that is our job as
Yeah.
therapists and coaches, because energy and information, they're the same thing. Our job is when somebody is stuck, is to show them a new perception that gives them more energy, that gives them more information in such a way that they can Bruce Lee that shit and be like water and flow through something that never was blocking them in the first place. And our job
Right.
is to melt everything that's not between us and whatever divinity is for that particular person as well.
Hmm.
So taking something that disassociates you. Okay, well, we're doing the same mechanism in EFT. We're doing the same mechanism in EMDR. We're basically in the triad of change:
Hmm.
focus, language, structure. Focus, language, structure. In the triad of change, if you are stuck in one of these three, if you create movement in creatively in the other two, you will get movement in that one. So, like, what is the ketamine doing? Well, number one, you're giving them something to focus on, right? And so we're shifting the physiology. So we're shifting the structure. We're
Hmm.
focusing on something. What does it do? It changes the language, right? Or
Yeah.
we can go to cognitive therapy. Is it true? We're asking about the language in order to do what? We're shifting the focus in the language in order to shift the felt sense of how we feel. Like, you can use this with every possible way of healing, and it'll describe
Yes.
what's the mechanism that's actually going on.
Yeah.
So to be able to, and I call it the difference between objective consciousness and subjective consciousness,
Right.
right? So in non-duality meditations, if we think of what we experience as a human being in this reality and our five senses, although there's like 30 something senses, but if we just think of that, and every meditation that you've probably heard of tells us to do what? Be still and know that I am God. What is be still? To get quiet. What does it mean? It means to stop listening to all of this. Why?
Hmm.
Because then we become aware of the spectrum of everything that actually is in the silence and it's not silence, right?
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
ketamine allowing you to step out of that conditioned anxiety, or that
Hmm.
conditioned identity is the word I was looking for, in
Yeah.
such a way that you can, even for a moment, it's like with mushrooms also. Like, how many studies has Harvard done now where it's the most spiritual experience that anybody's ever had? For those that don't understand, it's because it's shutting down a part of the brain that
Hmm.
says you are separate. And almost everybody has an experience that says, I am one with everything,
Yeah.
because that maybe is actually the reality. And
Yeah.
it's not about belief, it's about experiential wisdom. It's what
Hmm.
have you experienced? If you haven't experienced being one with everything, well,
Yeah.
there are a lot of ways to get there, people. Like,
Yeah.
keep listening to the podcast, because I'm sure we'll go over.
And what when the difference between belief and knowing is huge too, because to me it's the experiential aspect of things that create the knowing. Like, I know that I'm part of the whole, and I can say that it's not something I believe, it's something I know because I've experienced it. Now, I've there's plenty of other things that I believe, like reincarnation, for example. Like, I don't know that that's it. I don't know that that is what happens when I die, or if it happens at all. But I believe it because other things that I've read or whatever have led me to that belief. But the knowing is what's important. And that's where the ego tricks us, right? That's where we get stuck, because if you have something traumatic happen to you, well, subconsciously that creates this supposed knowing that if you're ever in this situation or with this type of person or with this, whatever it is, these circumstances, that thing's going to happen again. And so, I mean, that's
And so let's
half of.
let's 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 just slow down that what you just said there for a moment, right?
Okay.
Traumas and not what happened to us. Trauma is what occurred inside of us because of what happened to us. And what occurred inside of us was because of the experience and either conditioning, modeling, or an actual trauma, physical in some way, we created a defense mechanism that came on board to protect us in the future. And
Yes.
in order to process that, we need to be able to down regulate that trigger that's trying to protect us if it's no longer necessary. Sometimes they're really helpful. I
Yeah.
got into a
Yeah.
car wreck one time where somebody hit me going 70 miles an hour when we were slowing
Wow.
down 45-mile-an-hour construction zone on I-35, right?
Wow.
And for the next 2 weeks, I walked around with my every time I saw a car in the rearview mirror, I walked around with my shoulders all tensed up. I
Ah,
just so happened to be getting my education in advanced neuromuscular massage therapy at that time, and I went to a class, and on that particular day, this is 2 weeks after that crash, we had a Reiki master that was our anatomy instructor, and she had us get up on the table one at a time. There was like 8 of us in this class, and each one of us, she said, play some music. She took our feet and she started swinging them back and forth. She says, I want you to allow your body to go anywhere that it wants to go. And I want all 7 of the other people's hands up here. So
yeah.
every individual had 14 pairs of hands that were holding up this individual. For some of the smaller women, we had them dancing upside down in the sky. And when you're in a complete place of safety and you allow your body to go where it wants to go, there is a myofascial unwinding where we will automatically revisit trauma. So it was my turn, like about the 6th of the 7. And when I got up there, I immediately went into a fetal position and started shaking involuntarily,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
after that session, that one little weird little session with a bunch of massage therapists, over 90% of this was completely gone. And
Wow.
and that was probably one of the sparking moments of me going, okay, what just happened? I want to know what happened. And then if you are struggling and you're listening to this and your body is foreign to you and you have anxiety and a felt sense that you can't control, please hear this. There is nothing that has been conditioned that cannot be conditioned a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. You can process, and it doesn't take 15 generations. It doesn't take 15 years. It takes 15 minutes if you're in a safe place, and we can creatively take your mind, show you how to take your mind to get your mind out of the way so that your
Mm-hmm.
body can do what it normally knows how to do all on its own.
Yeah.
And how many ways are there to do that? Oh my God, so many. Why? Because you're so creative in the way that you blame yourself, defend yourself, you know, you're unworthy. You know, we got a list of negative cognitions this long, you know, that
Right.
are what? They're in the way of you doing what an animal will do normally in the safaris of Africa if a cheetah
Mm-hmm.
captures the impala. I know you've probably seen that video.
Yeah.
If you haven't, there's a video about a cheetah capturing an impala. And
Uh,
we don't see the fight or flight, but we do see that the impala, which is like a deer with the weird antlers, he's like, looks like he's dead, just dead. There's like, you can't even tell he's breathing. And so the cheetah has done this, and he hasn't done the death kill yet, but he's done it in baboon country. And so these baboons are coming out of the trees, and they're basically, hey, there's a cheetah in my territory. We don't like it. And so they're getting closer. And so the cheetah has to decide if it wants to keep its lunch or not. If it does, it's going to have to tangle with a full-grown baboon. It does not want
wow.
to tangle with a full-grown baboon. So it, a little bit, and then it bugs out of there. But there's a cameraman watching all this. I think there's a javelina or something. And he finally goes back to that impala. And it's like there 2 or 3 minutes. And all of a sudden you see the belly of that impala go, and it does that for like a minute or two. Then it makes its way up into a seated position where it begins just violently shaking back and forth. And then it makes itself up to its legs, kind of shakes things off. And then it scampers back off to its herd because it doesn't have a forehead like we do, because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have a prefrontal cortex that has all of these stories of tribe and social norms that tell us who the fuck we're supposed to be. It just
Right.
does what Mother Nature normally knows how to do. It had
Yeah.
gone into extreme parasympathetic nervous system activity as Mother Nature's way of literally allowing it to die peacefully, and then it recovered very naturally. And everyone can do that The question is what's in the way and how can you be set up? So if that's what you want, if you got something you're carrying, go to a sacred ember, go do some breath work, go do some somatic process, go shock your system with an ice bath in such a way that there's a shift in your autonomic nervous system. And there's like happiness just kind of shows up with the melting of the brown fat and all that stuff as well. Sorry, I get excited about what's possible.
No, I love it, man. That's I love your passion. You know, I mean, just when you hit on the desk, it made your screen shake, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, dude!" Like, you love what you do, and that's what makes you good at it. You know what I mean? And it's
when you've experienced freedom in your body, when you experienced, I'm no longer holding whatever this was, this karma, this trauma. I think they're kind of the same thing. Like when you no longer have it and you have flow. Man, go get your flow. It's there. It's for the taking. You just need to learn how to process, not cope. There's a difference between a coping mechanism, because most people's coping mechanisms are what? Avoidance and projection.
Yeah.
And that's not what processing means. Finish that fucking cycle and downregulate your autonomic nervous system and stand in the middle of the trauma train track generationally, so your kids don't inherit that shit.
Right.
Which they will, but only always.
So a lot of times when we're doing breath work, we do 5 rounds, 60 breaths, a full minute out hold, and as long as you can in hold, right? 5 rounds of that. And in the first 2 to 3 rounds, at the very end of the out hold, when we get to about 40 seconds, I'll start saying, okay, notice this feeling that's coming up. This is a familiar feeling. This is anxiety. This is your brain telling you something's wrong and you need to do something about it. I said, but trust your body. Your body knows what it's doing, and you're safe. And I promise you can make it to a minute with this out hold. You know, and so that's in breath work. And then when we get to ice bath, I'm like, as soon as you get in there, your mind's going to tell you, what the fuck are you doing? Get out. This is stupid. You shouldn't be doing this. And you're going to go into full fight or flight. But I promise you, if you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, just follow that. And if, I'm always right there in front of them. So like, if they're like, I'm like, nose, breathe, and they find that place. Right. And man, it takes one ice bath for somebody to really feel what it feels like to take that control back, to regulate their nervous system, and to overcome, the egoic part of the mind that's telling you, like, you're broken, you can't do this, you're crazy, why are you doing this, right? And then the same thing again in sweat lodge. You go in there, it gets hot, you're sweating, you start to panic a little bit, and you can tell yourself, we're safe, it's okay, I'm fine, and so it's just little practices like that over and over again, you eventually get to a place that, when shit hits the fan, you don't have to react in the same way you did a year ago. You can stay grounded and know and stay grounded in who you are and what is real and what's not, and recognize a threat if it's there. Because don't get me wrong, if there's some dude that walks in with a gun, like, fight or flight is completely appropriate at that time, but should you still be having that fight or flight response a year later? Right.
I often talk about how anxiety has two, like, I know the DSM has all these different things, which I think we call that the doorstop manual. I think nothing is more dangerous than labels, but that there's really two major reasons for anxiety. And you just kind of nailed one of them, which is, all right, I'm actually in danger. That's a good signal. We don't want to get rid of that one, right? Mm-hmm. But the other one is the understanding that through either conditioning, modeling, or actual occurrences, something occurred where we have dysregulated up into fight, flight, freeze, or disassociation in some way, and we haven't completed that cycle yet. And anxiety, and the metaphor that I use is when we're, especially on a Texas highway, I'm sure other states have them as well, you go past that white line, and there's what we call a rumble strip. And you're like, what is the purpose of the rumble strip? And the purpose of the rumble strip is to send you a signal that tells you have gone out of homeostasis and something needs to be adjusted. To me, I look at anxiety as the exact same thing. We literally have a rumble strip that's inbred. And so what is what does the industry do? Well, one of the things the industry does is they give people what? Xanax. They give a medicine that inhibits GABA in such a way, and GABA is an inhibitory signal, right? So what does that actually do? It literally shuts off the rumble strip inside of us. And I have worked with so many people that have worked with different psychologists to where when we ask somatically this question about where do you feel that in the body, they make fun of that question because they don't understand it, because their whole realm of treatment is just cognitive. But that question gives us so much understanding. Number one, it tells us if you have the ability to get in touch with the felt sense. Number two, there's patterns objectively to polyvagal of how and why we hold things. Somebody tells me they're feeling something in their gut. What do we know? Somebody took their power, or they're interpreting somebody took their power. That's a commonality of where I don't need to know the story. I need to know how your body is holding that, with the new golden mental emotional rule that if you can dissolve the felt sense of the charge in your body, then it's just a story. It always was just a story. And that's the magic that the somatic processes are basically that are getting introduced. I mean, 10 years ago, you couldn't find an EMDR therapist. Now, now everything's changed, right? And hopefully the insurance industry changes to meet with it as well. Like, I know you do certain sessions, 50 minutes probably. I can't do a 50-minute session. All of my sessions are 2 hours, because I'm going to be almost everything I do is processing in those sessions as well. And why we're moving more and more towards intensive work, because there's only so many of these, defense mechanisms that people are holding. There's only so many. And so it literally can be kind of systematic of how do I go in there and start looking at it and encouraging people to do that.
I'm actually getting away from taking insurance because of those limitations.
Yeah, I haven't taken it, and I don't think I've ever taken it, actually, except when I was working with the organization. It just, they don't understand. I came from massage therapy to Reiki to, Parama Shiva, Shakti energy healing, to counseling, so I had a body-based understanding, and I drove my teachers crazy because, I was one of the first people that had a mindfulness, society at the school, and people made fun of me back then because it was still like, what is that, Buddhism? That's not Christian, is it? Like, it's incredible. I'm very pleased to see how we're evolving, but I don't think that we're evolving fast enough. I think between what we know and what is mainstream, there's a big gap where there's a lot of people that are falling through the cracks. And this is why I would encourage people to reach out, whatever type of newsletter, club, organization you're doing. I would invite them to sign up for our free men's Facebook group. We have a membership ongoing where we give basically access to courses and books, just because you're paying the normal membership as a part of maintaining the brotherhood as well. So there's like 5 different books that we give to men, and I think about 10 different courses, one of which is the 28-day dopamine reset as well, which is you and I haven't even started talking about dopamine yet. That's a whole other episode, probably all on its own.
Yeah.
All right, man. What have we not covered today in this initial conversation? Here's a question I have for the audience, because I like the long podcast format. This is good because for us, this was just 2 people that have come to some of the same conclusions separately, coming together and go, oh, wow, I can talk about this because somebody else understands it, instead of just trying to explain it to a client. We have the Reforged, a podcast by the Authentic Masculinity Project, but I think this should be its own kind of series in the long format. And I would ask the listeners that have listened this far, hey, help us name it, put something in the comments, as well.
Yeah.
What we want to make sure that we do is we're going to put both information on how to connect with me and with Phoenix down in probably the first comments also. What have we not covered today that we need to in this initial session?
Man, the only thought I have is, I find myself, so one of the co-facilitators that I have at Sacred Ember, there was we had a staff retreat, and at the end of the staff retreat, my wife was like, well, should I order pizza for everybody or something like that? And he was like, or I was like, yeah. And then so I asked him, I was like, what kind of pizza do you like? And he's like, oh, I don't know. He goes, what kind of pizza? He goes, and he looked at me like confused, and I was like, what's up? And he goes, well, I don't know what kind of pizza like you people eat. And I was like, you people? And he goes, well, yeah, like you guys are like, super healthy and like, like you take care of your bodies and like, you're all about like supplement vitamins and different. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've become one of the you people. Like, and I was like, okay, right. But that highlighted how typical it is for us to, like, you and I are passionate about what we do. We know it works because we've seen it not only in ourselves but in other people. And so we find ourselves in this place where it's just, this is the truth for us. This is how it is, right? And I'm finding more and more that our people like that group is so small right now, but it feels like it's huge because we surround ourselves by the people that are doing healing and doing this work and stuff like that. But the people that we're working with, they're going back out into the world of not this. And so one thing that I've really been trying to, and that's part of the reason why I created the groups for people that come to Sacred Ember to fall back into, um, is because I know that the minute my client leaves this office, they're going to go back to the life that they were living before they came into the magic zone. You know what I mean? And how do we have the continuation of care to where, I guess, people, and I know this is a lot of things that I can't control because I can't, they have to make those changes on their own. But, and I didn't come to be one of those people overnight either. It's been over like 7 years since I started my journey, and so how do we help people continue to walk the path, continue to um, find themselves, when as soon as they return home, it's right back to what they left when they came.
So I want to go through two different aspects of this. One is I agree with you. Although I think a lot of healing is changing very rapidly. One thing I do want to kind of call out is one of the things I did as soon as I graduated and got my license also was I had as many coffees as I possibly could with other counselors. And the reason was because I wanted to be the iron against iron to kind of go, okay, what do I think I know? And am I right or am I not? Like I wanted to know truth. And I was surprised at how many counselors that I met with didn't know what somatic process was. I was
Right.
surprised at, how deep, all right, cognitive behavioral therapy is and you know what? Cognitive behavioral, is this true? Powerful question. That's the root of cognitive. It's very powerful. But what I discovered pretty quickly in just observation of people was
Mm-hmm.
that I have yet to meet a therapist that I've had extended conversations with that doesn't come from trauma. That's
Mm-hmm.
how
Oh
that's
yeah.
how we are attracted to this industry. And
Oh
so
yeah.
unfortunately the reality there is that if you haven't really done, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, it's subjective, the body-based trauma healing, generational childhood, past romantic relationship wounding, somatic process healing, then you are a counselor with trauma that's walking around trying to help other people with trauma. And I think there are a lot of very predictable, uh, you know, transferences that occur in that
Mm-hmm.
scenario. So my advice to anybody that's out there that's trying to do the work, and if you're meeting with somebody and you don't feel safe, heard, understood in any way, then leave, run, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, for
Right.
example, if you're deconstructing, a Christian counselor, that might not be for you. Like there, you got to find your particular groove, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one part of that. As we talk about people and how do they connect and how do they hold on to stuff, to me, it's a step, right? The first part
Right.
of
Right.
so much of what we're doing, and the reason why we're doing podcasts, the reason why we're now on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram, is unfortunately there's a certain amount of show business to capture the attention so that we can go, hey, look over here at what's possible, right? So
Yeah.
we have to capture the attention first. But then when we capture the attention, our biggest goal is we want to spark curiosity. And this is all the way back to the very beginning of you in this podcast saying there has to, especially for men, has to be an initiation. A spark is you lighten a fire, right? Because the spark of curiosity, that lights the flame of motivation. And motivation is the fuel for transformation. So what I would say is first, it's really every man should be listening to me to this one. It's really, really healthy to surround yourself with 5 to 10 men that tell you when you're full of shit. It's so healthy. Otherwise, we stay in this brown helmet reflection of our own bullshit, right? It is so, I don't even care if you agree with them. It like, there's so much science about, men that put each other down lovingly, joking around about, the loyalty and the integrity that, like we talked about right before we came on. You're like, should I watch my language? And I said, fuck no. Why? Because there's literally studies that show that you have more integrity, more loyalty, more intelligence because you come from an authentic kind of place as well.
It takes intelligence to learn how to use the word fuck so fluidly.
Now, both of us are ex-military. I know that the first 6 months coming out of the military, I got in trouble because I was hanging around I saw my mom for the first 6 months, and I used that word for every part of the English language in the military. That's that's the culture. That was hard to break, but I agree with you.
What service did you come from, Scott?
I was Navy. Yeah, I was a
Navy.
In the Navy. All right. Yeah, so I
give
you guys rides.
You know how everyone says that Marines eat crayons, right? You've heard that?
I don't know if I've heard that one.
You've never heard that? Okay, so like
so.
anytime, the banter between services is like, Army does this, Navy does this, whatever. And they always come back with like, yeah, well, at least we're not crayon eaters. And I'm like, well, but have you tried blue? It's pretty good. Anyway, but I say that because the shirt that I'm wearing today, if you look close enough, it looks like crayon marks, right?
Okay.
And I think my camera's going to move if I try to do this, but I can do it quickly. But it says USMC.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, I didn't see that.
So, it's one of those things where people talk shit, but you just own it and make it part of it.
Nice. To continue that, I think that men need to get around other men, and that if you come to the Campfire online Facebook group, join one of the groups. But if you can't do that, go to one of your retreats, sign up for the newsletter, like start feeding yourself information that does actually have just ongoing, regular, normal conversation. Social norms are very, very powerful, right? I mean, one of our coaches, Jake, he just recently got married, and he is now helping raise an 11-year-old stepson who's never been around authentic masculinity. And, the kid started off with wearing flip-flops and shorts, and now he's like tucking in his t-shirt into jeans and, boots and stuff. Like it's like, and I know that's little things like that, but he's learning about what it means to take responsibility for yourself, to be the structure with the empathy, with the heart also, to both have a really stiff spine, but also to have an open heart. I think what happens is often we conflate those two. And when we shut one down, we shut the other down. And to just be able to separate that for parts work, that's what it is, but it's in the body, to be able to shift that and get around men that are modeling that in such a way to where you can ask the hard questions. There's let's have conversations about porn, and what's the difference between that and masturbation? And, what do you actually need for your prostate, and what's going on with your dopamine? And, how do you do this mechanism of relationship with yourself and with your spouse? Like, there's so much science that we have now, and there's so many ways for us to actually pay attention. Get around people that understand some of these things so that you can begin understanding the mechanisms of the energetics of relationship, both with your significant other and with yourself, whether that's romantic or whether that's your career or who the fuck you came here to be. Come on, get around people that are going to push you up and be the mountain range that helps you be the mountain that also finds that container inside the mountain of energy. And the best metaphor I can use here is I've worked with so many men that container only goes up to about here. And it's like, we need to take a sledgehammer and break that shit open so it goes all the way to the bat belfry, so they have access to their own energy again. Yeah. And what does that mean? And what does it feel like?
Right. Talking about masturbation and porn and all that stuff. More of one of the recent discoveries I've had with myself is like, as a man, you know, masturbation, sex, all of those things were always just some sort of like a release. It was like, I need this release, I need this release, whatever. And I've if somebody would have told me, man, like if you masturbate, like explore your body, like see what it feels like to just brush your fingers over your knee or your belly button. You know, that's something I never, as a man, was taught or told or anything like that. But after I had read about that, I started noticing, like, when I would, have sex with my spouse, like, it was like most of my energy was about pleasing her. And it
Right.
was like completely ignoring myself, but I was like really good at that, and so
And it's
I
a list of
stopped,
check
like,
marks, right? We're back to that.
yeah,
How do I love and how do I be loved? Well, I have to
yeah.
I have
And
to do the
so,
check marks, right?
and I noticed I found it very difficult to just settle in, surrender to my wife, and let her touch me, and let her, I tell her, like, I worship her body, I worship her yoni, her temple, and that's all fine and well. Like, I'm a man, that's cool, that's what we do. But like, I couldn't find myself able to relax enough and settle into surrendering to let her worship me,
Right.
surrender, and like, and so that's something that I've been
Especially
working
if you've
on.
had sexual trauma previously as well.
Right.
And what we mean by sexual trauma is not necessarily that you were abused, but sexual trauma in that in a healthy, secure relationship, we have boundaries. And boundaries
Yeah.
are not just the toxic behavior we want to keep out. Boundaries are also the, in a secure relationship, things that we should be able to expect to receive as well.
Right.
This is
Right.
where a lot of men cut themselves short, where we teach men what healthy boundaries actually are. But at the same time, we teach that. We also teach, all right, how do you create a container of safety for her heart? Like it's not one or the other, it's both. But then when we begin identifying these things, one of the things that we also begin identifying is the trauma, the childhood trauma that has become associated with release of sexuality as the
Mm.
only way a man resets his nervous system. And so
Right.
and the trauma that occurred to him may have nothing to do with sex. And
Right.
if you can downregulate the trauma, you will see that instead of a man being like a rat in a cage, of needing this one way of connecting intimately, number one,
Mm.
we can coach him into a whole bunch of other ways, and the
Right.
seesaw
Right.
will go down. But number two is that often that defense mechanism of I need this dependency, right?
Yeah.
It goes down. It's a difference between I have to fucking have chocolate cake, or you know what? I like chocolate cake. It's good
Hmm.
and I enjoy it
Yeah.
whenever I
Yeah.
can, but I don't. And it's a difference between having a hunger and a desire for her versus having a need. And this is what we talk
Hmm.
about in one of the first books, The Needy Little Boy Syndrome. This is a
Yeah.
book that I actually was brave enough to write to women, just thinking that
Mm.
I was going to be crucified as being another man that's mansplaining. But no, I mean, I did it in sovereignty, going, look, queen, here's how you stay authentic and you challenge your man in the right ways, being
Hmm.
a man that's come from the needy little boy syndrome myself, and
Yeah.
having been present with it, in such a way that I was actually able to melt the rat in the cage. I lived this
Right.
shit.
Yeah. And for me, that trauma, the trauma, the sexual trauma came from the Puritan mindset, like the what I was programmed and indoctrinated with, that sex was dirty and bad, and that anything outside of, just normal missionary style intercourse meant that I was, a sinner or a bad person or whatever. And so it's like deconstructing all that and unprogramming myself to allow myself to be free with my sexuality, with myself as an individual, by myself, and also with my wife. So yeah, one of the practices that I found or was recommended is that, like, I turned my own masturbation into like a ceremony or a ritual, to where, I'd light candles, put on some music, take my time, feel myself, and like, I can't tell you what that has done for me, as far as like not only orgasm, but as far as like just loving myself.
Right.
and realizing that I'm not just, a pleaser of women, but I'm a pleaser of myself as well, if that makes sense. And then from that perspective, I didn't need anything visual or to stimulate me, because I could do it for myself. And I feel like that's created this level of intimacy between my wife and I that is unparalleled, and it's like a lot of us, like, especially, well, I've heard plenty of stories where a parent walks in and finds their child masturbating, whether it's female or male, and their reaction is, "What are you doing? That's bad. Don't do that." Da, 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 da. That's traumatic,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Because now every time you touch yourself, that replays in your head, "Oh, I'm bad. I'm dirty. I'm a worthless human being." Yet we
And that
have
will
this need,
absolutely play out in your relationship too.
right? And we
Yeah.
have this need and this desire, but we're told that this natural, beautiful thing is ugly
Right.
and wrong and sinful,
Right.
And that I feel like that's probably one of the hardest things that I've learned to deconstruct. And I'm still doing it. It's
Yeah.
not like I got it figured out. There's times where, you know, with my wife, I still feel like I need to hide a part of myself, or like, not be fully expressive as to what I want sexually or anything like that, because I'm afraid that she'll judge me, and she doesn't. Like, this is my wife is not judgmental at all in that department, but in my head, if I do this or I say this, she
I
will
think
be.
this is a very rich conversation. This conversation might even deserve its own, session or podcast, because men are really curious because there are so many components we've just mentioned, which is, oh wow, my childhood trauma could affect my sexuality. Oh yeah, absolutely,
Oh yeah,
right? And
yeah.
then also the aspect of what is the difference between masturbation and porn as well, because there is actually a difference in,
Oh yeah.
especially when it comes to dopamine and how we're showing up in the world, and how when 50 years ago, porn was, were you brave enough to ask for the Playboy behind the counter, and
Mhm.
there was a big, like, now it's 2 clicks away, right? And
Right.
it's the difference between, back then it was fireworks, compared to it's now like a nuclear bomb. Like, our systems were never designed to take in, whether it's the porn or whether it's scrolling or Netflixing, never designed for the type of technology that's now hijacking a lot of our dopamine. And again, that's
Mhm.
something that we probably need to go into and help men understand that,
Yeah.
because there are so many men that they don't have. Let me just say this one: they took the dopamine out of rats, and then put the food 4 or 5 inches away from the rats, and the rats literally died from starvation. It didn't affect their motor function. They no longer had the motivation to go eat to survive. Right. So
Mm.
what is happening when we're tanking our dopamine is we're hearing of a loneliness epidemic with men. We're hearing of women say men don't engage anymore. Where have all the cowboys gone? All of this different aspects, because literally our motivation is being hijacked, and
Mm.
your soul actually did come here to do something, and you're 3 or 4 inches away from the food. And we
Yeah.
want to light that spark, man. Like, I want to get you curious about that. That's why we built the 28-day dopamine reset. Like, it's just push play, but it's got a depth of tracking material also, if you want to go deeper into understanding, where we're introducing parts work and somatic process and mindfulness and a lot of other different, I think there's like 70 something different modality, type of things that are in that particular course as
Mhm.
well, that help men shift the way that they're holding their reality. It's
Right.
kind of a big thing. I think that you touched on really, really important aspects, and I love to hear of a man that's spending time getting to know himself. And I would say, people, fly your freak flag. Go get the rubber sheets. Like, like, go live. Go, like, there's 2 reasons why you go to coaching or therapy. There's 2 major reasons. All right. The
Yeah.
first reason is, I'm okay. That's an EFT setup. Even though, fill in the blank, I'm okay. That's what we
Yeah.
want. Because if you're not okay, guess what? You're not okay. Like,
Right.
literally, it's
Right.
that simple. The other one is, do I feel alive? Do
Mhm.
I feel alive? And so let's go figure out what actually lights you up. And what we see is that often, like you just discussed, purity culture, Man, I hit a lot of those when I first started purity culture. People that were disassociated, and I didn't understand dissociation. I mean, I
Yeah.
hit walls with clients back then until I understood it. Really,
Yeah.
what makes you feel alive? And
Yeah.
I tell people what I teach my kids also. Don't go follow your dream. Let's go test your dream. But a big part
Yeah.
of that is what needs to be melted that's in the way of you putting down the oars and letting
Yeah.
your river of of flow
Well,
take you to your ocean of possibility,
and I feel
endless
like that
possibility.
that freedom comes, and I mean, this goes into shadow work. It goes into everything we talked about today. That freedom comes when there is nothing left in your life to hide. When there's nothing left in your life that you're only doing behind closed doors by yourself. That freedom comes when you're your most authentic self. You love every aspect of that, and you're not hiding anything. You're
And
not
so
doing
what he is
anything.
telling you is come see him or me and let us help you start a process of mindful inquiry that helps you not just identify what you're still hiding from yourself, but actually have a negotiation with all of your parts so that all of your rowers are rowing in the same direction and live the life your soul actually came here to be.
Fuck
Amen.
yeah.
Amen.
I love
Okay.
it.
I think that's a good stopping place for us. My name is Scott Austin Martin. I'm signing off with Phoenix, my good friend, fellow veteran, counselor, coach. Look in the comments for links if you want to talk more, or if you have ideas of things you'd like to hear us discuss or talk about as well. We left a lot on the table.
Yeah.
We could literally probably keep talking here for about 8 hours, but I got daddy things that I got to do today also.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us, and
Yes,
we'll see you
sir.
guys in the next session. Take care.
All right. Have a good one, Scott.
Thank you for listening to Reforged. Remember to like and subscribe for more.